is the most powerful event in world history? Some might say World War II. Some might say the Crusades. However, the most powerful event in world history is the Protestant Reformation. No singular other event has sent shockwave through time to the modern day than the Protestant Reformation. In this documentary, I will explore the Reformation and how it affected the world and the people living through it. Join me as I go on an expedition to explore the Reformation. Europe, in the 1500s. The continent is still recovering from the devastating 100 Years' War. In England, a bloody civil war known as the War of the Roses has just ended. In the West, Spaniards have just discovered the New World across the Atlantic. Meanwhile, the Spanish Inquisition has begun its reign of religious persecution. Meanwhile, in Germany, a professor by the name of Martin Luther is concerned about the state of the Catholic Church. Luther had always had an interest in the church since a young age. However, his father did not believe that that's what was best for Luther, and sent him to law school in early 1505. However, only 6 weeks later, Luther abandoned his studies into law and left the school for the local monastery. His excuse for leaving law school was that he had made a vow outside of the small town of Strottenhelm during a thunderstorm that terrified him so much that he made a vow to God that he would become a monk if he lived. Understandably, his father was not happy with him abandoning his lucrative future career for the monastery, saying, "May it not prove an illusion or a deception." After his studies in 1510, he was sent to Rome to represent his monastery to the Pope. Many years later, Martin Luther would comment that his mission had a profoundly negative impression on him. He found the lack of spirituality at the very heart of the Western Christianity discerning. Soon Luther started teaching at Witten University. In this time, he wrote 97 theses named The Discipline Against Scholastic Theology. In 1517, everything changed, however. After being irritated by John Charles over the preaching of selling letters of indulgence, titled The Forgiveness of Sins, Luther wrote his famous work, The 95 Theses. He wrote this to form a debate with the church. So on October 31st, 1517, he nailed his 95 Theses to the door of Wittenberg Church. This action is seen as the major event that sparked the Reformation. While both sides of the religious debate viewed it as an act of defiance at the time, this was as commonplace as sending a tweet today, simply an academic posting a debate topic. Initially, Luther's attempt failed. What he intended as a theological debate was instead perceived as an attack on the Catholic Church. During this period, Luther had formed an influential ally in Frederick the Wise, a ruler devoted to protecting his people's rights. However, the Pope's patience grew thin, and in early 1521 he issued the Papal Bull, declaring Luther a heretic and demanding he appeared in Rome. When the deadline passed, Luther took a bold step. He publicly burned the Papal Bull in the streets of Wittenberg. This action led to his excommunication from the church. Under normal circumstances, such heresy would be met with death by burning, but thanks to Frederick the Wise's negotiations with the Holy Roman Emperor, Luther was granted a free trial first. In 1521, Luther appeared before the Diet of Worms. When faced with the choice between death or recanting his beliefs, he famously declared, "Here I stand, I can do none other. God help me, amen." Despite being sentenced to death, the emperor honored his promise of safe passage until the Diet's end. In April, Frederick the Wise orchestrated Luther's kidnapping, secretly transferring him to Wartburg Castle for his protection. While chaos erupted around him, Luther focused on translating the Bible into German. The turmoil culminated in the Peasants' War of 1524, a conflict largely influenced by Luther's teachings. While Europe descended into chaos, across the English Channel, England was experiencing its own Reformation. King Henry VIII was married to Catherine of Aragon. However, after numerous pregnancies, only one child survived, a daughter named Mary. At the time, it was considered unacceptable to only have a female heir to the throne. During this period, Henry began to fall for Anne of Boleyn. Henry faced a dilemma. He needed a male heir, but the Pope would not grant an annulment to his marriage with Catherine. So, in 1527, Henry launched what would become known as the King's Great Matter. He convinced himself that his marriage to Catherine was all unlawful according to the Bible, because she had been his brother's widow. He petitioned the Pope to allow him to divorce Catherine. Unfortunately for Henry, the Holy Roman Emperor was Catherine's nephew, and the Pope had already defied the Emperor once, resulting in his imprisonment. The Pope was unwilling to annul the marriage. Over the next 5 years, many attempted to persuade the Pope to grant the annulment, but none succeeded. In 1532, Thomas Cromwell, who had risen to become Henry's chief minister, engineered a parliamentary revolution against the Church. Under his guidance, Parliament declared that the Church of England should be separate from the Catholic Church, paving the way for Henry's new role as its supreme head and completing the break with Rome. In the end, Henry had managed to divorce Catherine and marry Anne in January of 1533. By September, Princess Elizabeth was born. In retaliation, the Pope excommunicated Henry, but it was too late. Henry had already established himself as supreme head of the Church of England. Unlike the Continental Reformation, Henry never supported Luther and his theological reforms. This was not a reformation driven by theology, but rather politics. By the end of his reign, Henry had married 6 different women, divorcing, executing, or outliving each of them. He had 3 confirmed children, Mary, Edward, and Elizabeth, all of whom would eventually rule England and shape its religious future. After Henry's death in 1547, his young son Edward VI quickly took the throne. However, Edward died just 6 years later in 1553. Following a brief power struggle, Mary secured the throne. Mary had never forgiven her father for the treatment of her mother, Catherine of Aragon. She remained staunchly Catholic, opposing the Church of England. Mary moved swiftly to eliminate those who contributed to the English Reformation. In 1556, she executed Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who declared her parents' marriage annulled. During her 5-year rule, Mary earned the nickname Bloody Mary by executing approximately 287 religious disterns, primarily Protestant, leading to the widespread fear. By the time Elizabeth took power in November of 1558, significant damage had been done to the religious fabric of England. Unlike her sister, Elizabeth chose a different path. She never prosecuted anyone in England for their religious beliefs, and brought the English Reformation to a close, not with a sword, but rather tolerance and compromise. This approach, which became known as Elizabethan settlement, established a distinctly English form of Protestantism that allowed Elizabeth to rule for nearly 45 years in relative religious peace. The Reformation was a long and bloody event that consumed generations. It began with seemingly small events, amongst theological debate, and a king unhappy with his marriage. Yet the profound effects it had on world history is almost inconceivable. Just decades later, a ship carrying pilgrims fleeing religious persecution would land in the New World. 2 centuries later after that, the place where those pilgrims would land would become the United States of America.